times they wish to speak individually to each amendment, I'll leave that up to the respective members and parties themselves. But I will start with NDP 6, and I'll go to Mr. Rankin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to set the context before I move the first of several amendments to Part 5 of the Budget Implementation Act pertaining to the implementation of the U.S. Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, or FATCA as it's more popularly known. I'd like the members across to carefully consider the serious issues that have been raised at this committee concerning the implementation of this deeply flawed agreement. I hope they'll carefully consider and support our NDP amendments that address some of the serious problems that have arisen. It's become increasingly clear through departmental and witness appearances at this committee that the Conservative government simply has failed to adequately study the implications of FATCA and the implementation agreement with respect to privacy, constitutionality, and cost. Rushing it through in an omnibus bill without proper study is not only reckless, but it's also entirely unnecessary. The U.S. has recently delayed the application of FATCA sanctions until January 2015. Canada is already deemed in compliance with the U.S. law, and legal experts have testified to this committee that there's ample time, therefore, to properly study and amend this agreement. More than 1 million Canadians could be negatively affected by this deeply flawed agreement. And so we're simply asking yet again that the Conservatives slow it down and remove FATCA from this budget bill so it can be properly scrutinized and amended, and so we can ensure that Canadians' privacy and constitutional rights are protected. Surely that's of concern to every member of this committee, and it's more important, we say, to fix this and protect those many Canadians that are going to be affected than it is to ram this through in an omnibus budget bill that this agreement has no place being in the first place. So the first amendment, Mr. Chair, is NDP 6, which simply would say in Clause 99 that it be amended by adding, after line 11 on page 73, the following. Despite any other provision of this Act or the agreement, for all purposes related to the implementation of this Act and the agreement, the term U.S. person and the term specified U.S. person does not include any person who is a Canadian citizen within the meaning of the Citizenship Act or permanent resident within the meaning of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and who is ordinarily resident in Canada. This amendment is intended to address one of the most central issues pertaining to FATCA, and perhaps its greatest flaw, that this will impact Canadian citizens who are deemed to be U.S. persons and targeted by this agreement, but who are, in every other way, our fellow Canadian citizens and permanent residents of this country. I'd like to thank Lynn Swanson, who appeared before this committee, and Dr. Stephen Kish, and so many others, for their dedicated work to advocate for those who will be undeservedly caught in the FATCA net. Many experts have analyzed the agreement, and it was really negotiated with the protection of banks in mind, they have told us, not the people who will be affected. So I ask the members opposite to carefully consider and support this amendment, which if passed would protect our fellow Canadian citizens who for all practical purposes should not be affected by this agreement and who should have the same rights as every other citizen. We should not create a second class of Canadians with a second set of rights just because American law deems them to be U.S. persons. Even those born in Canada can be caught in the FATCA net. Finally, this would help the government avoid an inevitable charter challenge, which I hope they would be interested in avoiding. That is the purpose and intent of the First Amendment, Amendment 6, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rankin. We'll go now to Mr. Keddy and then have Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, what the honourable member is asking us to do is change really how the Americans apply their own laws, which they have a right to do. We don't have to agree with it, but they tax based on citizenship, and that's simply how it is. But worse yet, his amendment would really not just change the way the Canada-United States Enhanced Tax Information Exchange Agreement works, but it would actually override the terms of the intergovernmental agreement negotiated with the U.S., providing that the terms that the U.S. person or specific U.S. person do not include a person ordinarily resident in Canada who is a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. Of course, what they leave out of that person would also have to be a U.S. citizen or dual citizen. The motion would mean that the financial accounts of U.S. citizens who have such connections to Canada would not be reported. It is clear, Mr. Chairman, that the scope of persons in respect of which the U.S. seeks information under the IGA, consistent with the U.S. FATCA legislation, includes all U.S. citizens, including those who are dual citizens or residents of another country. This is based on the requirements of the U.S. tax system, as I mentioned earlier, which places tax filing obligations on all U.S. citizens, even those that are also citizens of another country. At the end of the day, this would result in Canadian financial institutions and their clients being exposed to the U.S. FATCA withholding tax. And just finally, I want to say, there's really some misleading information being put out here. U.S. citizens have always been applicable to paying taxes in the U.S. if they were following the tax regime of the U.S. I mean, most of us have some U.S. relatives or U.S. family members or U.S. connection, especially if you live in Atlantic Canada. And the reality is the difference here, there's no difference in U.S. tax law. The difference is they're enforcing the rules that have always been in place. If you're a U.S. citizen, you have to comply with U.S. tax rules, and you have to file income tax. Doesn't mean that you're going to pay income tax, but you've always been responsible to file. And that comes with a duty of citizenship. And, we can like it or not. It's not up to us to make that judgment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Keddy. I have Mr. Cullen.